75% of Filipinos watch basketball one way or another, right? Like it's crazy. China has over 625 million basketball fans.
Okay, hey everyone, welcome back to another week's episode of Rising Giants with Max and Dom. Today on the show we have a guest from Thailand, Vansa Chattikaranj, and she is basically the partner of Present Ventures that is focused mostly on sports 3.0, so this new investment category in the VC space that's been around for a long time, but now seeing a lot more investors focus on it. So before we dive into Present Ventures, we would like to just begin by talking a little bit about your career previous to founding that, and maybe you could just share a little bit more about your experiences with um, World Bank, OMG, the World Economic Forum, all different types of experiences. So it would be great just to hear more about that.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. I think ever since we met, beginning of the year at your event, been very excited about the impact you guys have in the region. Know a couple of your portfolio companies through your fund, and they're fantastic. So very excited for this. I, my background, I would say I've always been operating at this intersection between innovation and looking at kind of really interesting society challenges. My entry, how I got into sports is like anything but conventional. Right? As you mentioned, I had multiple lives. I'm like a cat, 9 lives. So where we've arrived today with sports and this sports 3.0 moment is actually very fortuitous, where technology and entertainment, which is where my business partner comes in, is really getting pushed to help sports kind of recreate itself. And we'll come back to that, but just to kind of quickly step through background. Thai, born and raised in Thailand, had very athletic parents. Sports is always in my DNA. When I was 11, I got sent to the US because my dad essentially wanted us to be able, my brother and I, to be able to play sports at a young age. Became All-American swimmer in college, then kind of stepped away from sports on a day-to-day basis and entered into more the world of technology. Graduated from Columbia University, did my master's in kind of around remote sensing and GIS, and got recruited, luckily, to the World Bank back when they were trying to figure out if they can apply some technology, some remote sensing and satellite imagery to aid their infrastructure loan decisions. Because a lot of the countries that the World Bank give loans to are really high risk, right? It's like the lender of last resort. And you didn't have a lot of on-ground data. So they were taking these kids and they were like us, the 5 of us, and they were like, okay, let's see, like, can you guys be useful in this investment team? And so that was actually my exposure into the financial world, was kind of through being the 1 or 2 engineers on each one of these investment teams. And it was great for me because, I was a 20-year-old getting sent to, I worked in 13 different countries all over the world. It really helped build up kind of the mental resilience and the adaptability, which I think later on came to help when I started going down the entrepreneur route.
Wait, sorry, did you
And
just say it
yeah,
was 13 countries? Is that right?
13 different
Wow,
countries.
wow,
Yeah. I
that's a
so
lot.
it started off actually the first one they sent me to was the Maldives. And I was like, wow, this is like international development. Like, what is this? They sent me to Mali, which is like 2 by 2 square kilometer, and like 130,000 people live on it or something. And they were like, stay here for a couple months. It's
Oh,
very
wow.
interesting. Yeah, but it was a lot of exposure, right? And it really got me to see cultures from all around the world, in South America and Africa. So I couldn't ask for a kind of a better first placement out of school. And in terms of exposure, like you mentioned OMG, like how I got into that was also very fortuitous. Where in 2012, when Myanmar first opened up, they I got sent over to work on a project there and randomly met this British guy in a bar. which never ends well, right? Like when a story starts like that. And he was like, hey, this is how I remit money home. And it was Bitcoin. And I didn't know what it was. And I was like, oh, wow, this is so cool. And so I then subsequently spent about 2 years trying to convince the World Bank to look at it for financial inclusion perspective. And I think the official answer was like, you're drunk. So at one point I was like, okay, I'm drunk. That's fine. I quit the World Bank, moved back home to Thailand, and naively was like, I'm starting a startup and it was going to be a peer-to-peer lending on Ethereum. And that was super early, like 2000, early 2015, I was looking at this. And so it was going to be the first couple apps on Ethereum, right? Like one, product wise, way too early, regulatory wise, way too early. But that had essentially put me into the network of people that were these early adopters. And that's how I met the guys at then called Omise Payment, now rebranded to OPN. And essentially what they were trying to do was to clone Stripe, really copy Stripe, deployed it across Southeast Asia plus Japan, because there was this rise in e-commerce and payment was still very much friction. So I joined them as to lead new business and strategy. We created a subsidiary that was called Omise Go, then got rebranded to OMG Network, and essentially build out the first layer two scaling solution on Ethereum at that time. And that was a really interesting time because it was, like there's no blueprint, right? We were doing research and we were trying to ship really the first kind of production ready L2 on Ethereum. It was really fun times. Yeah, so I was there, scaled the company up, with the holding company, grew with them to about Series D plus, and then essentially exited at the end of 2020. Kind of took a step back and said, I like technology. I know how to take new technology and apply it into different settings. With the payment background, I understood consumer behavior and insight. With crypto, having exposure to collectibles, like the meme economy, all that stuff, I was like, I know how attention span works. And so going back to my sport roots, like it's always just been the thing that, grounds me. And I love sports in every aspect as a fan, as an athlete, as a competitor. And COVID was coming in, like that was when COVID happened. So I had some sports friends being like, hey, you know how to build a website, right? Like, why don't you come help us do something? And so I started angel investing. Met my co-founder, Kit Hawkins, who is, an incredible human, way more accomplished on his resume than I am, comes from the entertainment, the music business. And we realized that there are these new fans that are coming in, and there are opportunities where we can look at new business that are being built in this era to service these new sports fans. So I'll pause there for a second. I know that was a little bit of a long train of thought, but that's how I kind of got here.
Okay, and just quickly on the crypto Web3 kind of side of things, when you were with Omes Go and focusing on that, what was the Thailand ecosystem like for that at the time, like or even Asia in general? Maybe you could just share like how much it's come from back then to where we are today, and obviously we have DevCon coming up in Bangkok just next month.
Yeah. Back then it was very few and far between. I would say that the demographics are quite different from what I see now with kind of the crypto community and then the ones in 17, right? Because the 17s are a lot more nerdy and developer friendly. And I think the finance bros came in and then the ecosystem shifted quite a bit. Not to say it's good or bad, right? I think you kind of need to go through that cycle. When we build out OMG, like credit really is to my CTO at the time, Kasima, one of the best CTO in Thailand. Like I'm willing to like put my hands down on that. And he had to staff up teams from 3 different continents to essentially make the production team kind of complete from what we were looking at. And so I think developer talent then was scarce. There are nerds, but they're still pretty scarce to kind of recruit and put together a full product team. And now it feels like recruitment's a lot easier, but also people have gotten really good with remote work, right? So what we had to kind of make up at that point, now it just feels like a norm. So I think the world, Asia in general, and crypto, has become a very friendly place, and you can get talent either in Asia or from all over the place and work as a team, a remote first team, and it's everyday thing now.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting point you make about it's like the financialization of crypto has definitely happened, and that can have some interesting effects, right? Whereby you
Yeah,
just have so much crowding of the VC community into it that it's like it's almost hard to to separate what's substantial and what's just noise.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I keep telling people who want to come into the space, whether it's to build or to invest, as long as you know what game you're playing, then that's fine, right? I think we all get into trouble when we don't know what game we're actually playing. Yeah, I'll leave it to that.
No, that's fair. And so it would be great to discuss a little bit about the inception of Present Ventures and a bit about what Present Ventures focuses on, just for the audience to have a little bit of background. So it would be great to dive into I guess, like the inception story of how it came together, with obviously meeting your co-founder, and yeah, just a general overview of what it is that your
I
thesis
do.
is and where you position yourself.
Yeah. So Kit and I have been kind of angel investing together for a few years. And about a year and a half ago, we decided that I mean, we're both operators, and so we were itching to build, but we also realized that there is a gap in capital allocation in the areas that we were interested in. And so, a year and a half ago, we decided to form Present Ventures, and what it really is an investment, a global investment firm, and we focus on what we term the Sports 3.0, which is essentially, an era where there's a convergence between technology, my background, kit, entertainment, and being able to use that to reach out and build fandoms. So maybe before we go, like, kind of tease through that, just for context, it might be helpful to talk about kind of the sport as an asset class first,
Yeah.
just so people are aware. Like, I think globally at this point, sports team leagues, technology it's an asset class. You have PE firms coming in, you have sovereign funds investing, family offices, a lot of them in the US and in Europe, and now we're starting to see some Asian appetite, looking at things around sports, right? From a market size perspective, sports is 5 times larger than the global movie industry. So it's massive. Revenue base, it's generating a little bit over 400 billion. Sometimes you see 1.4 trillion as an estimate, but I think that feels high. But
Wow.
compared to the gaming industry, you have about 250 to 300 billion, right? So sports itself is massive. So there's a macro trend of people treating it as a very good investment alternative. So when we look at the evolution of sports, we put out this writing a couple of days ago around the Sports 3.0. And just to kind of put it in context, we looked at it as the first era of sports, because sports needs fans. If there's no fans, there's no pro sports, right? Period. And so when you want to section where the future of sports is going, we can kind of look back at where technology and content delivery meets fans. So we said, okay, era one, like if we have to put it in a bucket, it's really about kind of radio and network TV. And this is limited programming, passive viewing, people follow local heroes. Version two is when cable TV, satellite, and early internet came in. And this, you start to get 24-hour coverage, ESPN, and the rise of kind of these global sports brands. So the Nikes, Adidas, and then celebrities become champion in that, right? So the Jordan brands. And now where we're at is we're entering this kind of 3.0 era where it's digital and social media era. And we're talking about streaming, mobile, second screen, on-demand personalization. So with this, new companies and new leagues, these emerging leagues, as well as the brands like the new Nikes are being created today. So we look at it and we just said, hey, this is actually like a very interesting time to be deploying capital. And there's an Asian component to that I'll circle back to. But that's essentially what the essence of Present Ventures is we're trying to deploy capital into these kind of new emerging sports league brands and platforms that are, following kind of the new digital trend as technology comes online.
And how can traditional sports organizations adapt to meet the expectations of sports 3.0 fans? As you transition from the radio network to cable, satellite, and early internet, and now in this present like digital and social media age, I'd be curious to hear how organizations are starting to go in that direction.
Yeah, I think the reality of it is a lot of them still have to go through the 2.0 moment to make good contents. But we're also seeing, concretely, so we made an investment into Tomorrow Sports, which is essentially stadium golf, right? It's 2 hours, primetime ESPN indoor, with betting components and everything. So very kind of young fan focus, short attention span. They had partnered up with the PGA. And I think that's a very smart way where traditional leagues can actually tap into kind of newer format, is building some of these partnerships and kind of getting the fans through kind of newer format pipeline. Another example, kind of just coming off the back of the PGA, is they have also then realized that Creators League, like YouTube Golf, is massive, right? So I think about a month ago, they announced that before the Masters, they will actually get creators to actually come and play a round of golf and televise that. And so I think there are creative ways to do it. I don't necessarily I think it's going to be very hard to take a traditional sports format and then completely redo it, right? But you can partner and you can add on the different things around it to continue to be relevant and kind of get those new fans through that way. I think the other way that's been super successful is like content and storytelling, right? Like F1, like Drive to Survive. How many of your friends and how many of my friends? Yeah.
Honestly, a fantastic series. That was such a good onboarding mechanism, if you want to call it that way, for people into that sport. It was great.
For sure. Like I have so many, like I have a couple friends who are like now Lewis Hamilton fan, right? And I was like, why are you Lewis Hamilton fan? It's like, because. It's like, that's great.
Don't question it. Don't question it.
Yeah. He's got pretty eyes. Yeah, I think there's that. And then there's also, the cross-pollination between sports and music, right? So we were talking about Taylor Swift before the call started. I mean, last year, how many people did the NFL essentially onboard just because Taylor Swift was at a game?
Right.
It gets, I think if you take out the blinders and say not everything has to be neatly fit in a box to upgrade yourself, the possibilities are quite endless and interesting.
Yeah. And it's also still so early that there's so many opportunities for, almost like A/B testing these different opportunities too, in a intentional and non-intentional way, right? I would imagine, the relationship between Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, for example, it's it's a non-intentional thing for, her to onboard hundreds of thousands of new viewers to the NFL because she comes to a Chiefs game, right? It's just that, it just kind of naturally and organically happens, which is great. Um,
Yeah. And
yeah.
they became the most hated team in the NFL.
And see, that's the thing. People, it's this this interesting piece of how like controversy creates like this kind of like an output of like more attention in that sense, which is a bit fascinating to think about in like this context. Um, aside from, the creator space, which, coming to mind, I'm also thinking about like content creators going and putting together like boxing matches and things of this nature, right? More on the technology side, which emerging technologies do you think will have the largest impact on sports in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two areas that will really take off, it's already taking off, is the fan engagement side of the technology, and then also the player's performance, right? And underlying that is like AI has a massive impact on content generation, distribution, personalization, all the things that you need to get from what's happening on the field to your fans, on the field or in the locker room or anywhere to your fans. So I think AI is massive. Player performance side, we're always trying to push for, the highest jump, the everything, right? And so a lot of these insights, the data that you can tease out, becomes really compelling in terms of pushing those insights forward, and so players can perform better. It'll take time to play out. Like when we're, you know, admittedly, when we see AI slap on a deck, you guys probably see the same thing. As soon as AI comes on the deck, and we're like, huh, like how do I? Is it a rap GPT again? Are we all gonna get
Right.
killed? Like what's going on? So we like it when there's actually a company that's compelling and it has its own revenue stream, and then they use AI to like uplift it, right? And so that's why I think the fan engagement space, we've looked at a couple of deals together in there, consolidating that and being able to really, really hone down and know your fans and their preferences becomes really interesting for us. And it unlocks a lot of things. It actually circles back to the emerging sports league thesis that we're looking at, right? Because back in the day, if you look at how the sports league kind of go about, they try to push as much distribution as possible because then you essentially get sponsorship dollars and ads that way, right? And then media rights. But with technology, with platform that can actually help you reach your fan, niche sports can start to come online, right? And so it's really about kind of trying to find that fan and the passion that's not being filled. And so you're seeing like World Slap League, I think is the Dana White one. It's like valued at like
Yes.
700 mil. It's crazy. Yeah, so people are starting to find their own community through that. Like my friend's involved with this fishing league, and people are really going crazy for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a really good prime example of that one was the most recent winter sports where curling became like a very hugely popular activity afterwards. So then you saw, following up on that, you saw, bars that offered curling, indoor curling, as a source of entertainment, just because so many people
It's
got into
amazing.
it. So you're right. It's super exciting to see how these like niche sports are starting to, are starting to gain more attention and traction, and it sure sounds like wild valuations. um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's hard with kind of new emerging leagues, right? The hard part is there's so many things you have to get right. But if you get it right, it's massive. And I think that's why we're very excited about kind of these cohorts of emerging sports.
And what specifically talking about the emerging sports thesis, what are some of the criteria that you look at when evaluating, you know, companies that fall within the sports technology and entertainment space, kind of like in this combination that you're looking at?
Yeah.
Is there anything that specifically that you like to focus on, or whether it's founder first or any other approaches?
Yeah. So I mean, generally, we're small as a firm today, and so we try to keep our investments to about six a year. We're very hands-on on it, and we come in at kind of post-revenue stage, typically. When we're looking at these investments, we really, we look at ourselves as cliche, we look at ourselves as partners. And so like first and foremost, we're like, no assholes. Like we don't want to work with, like we want to make sure that we actually want to go through fire with this team, right? With this founding team. So we look for someone, clear vision, undeniable passion to win. The financial metrics are kind of your general financial metrics, needs to stand up. But I think where it gets a little bit more unique for us is we need to make sure that there's a clear exit plan that we can see. And how we do that is we actually work with a network of PE and late stage funds during our due diligence process. And so when we're close to something, we take it to them and we say like, okay, like, would this be something that you guys would consider at the next stage? And that's one of the key criteria metrics for us too. And I think it's good for us, it's good for our investor, and then it's also good for our portfolio because they kind of know, the stuff they need to hit, and who their target exit could be. So we look at that. We look a lot at the existing cap table and who's coming into that round. We spend a lot of time curating our LP lists, and making sure that there's representation, diverse representation. And, we want to make sure whoever we get on the cap table with or whichever company has that value in it. Because with sports, so much of it is emotion, right? And you need to have a very authentic team to be able to deliver really good products. So I feel like in the crypto days, I didn't spend as much. I was just like, oh, is it like, are they going to list? Great. But I think with this, we look at that kind of holistic side as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe tying back to the article that you had written, or that you read, excuse me, and talking about authentic connections, what challenges do you foresee for brands trying to form that authentic connection with the sports 3.0 fans as kind of those fans that fall within that sports 3.0 category?
Yeah, I think people are trying to understand who they are, right? Like, I mean, we wrote about it, but I think as an industry, we're still at the stage where we see a potential. We're trying to all describe perfectly what this is, and we're trying to build a solution for them. And so to your point, you can A/B test it because it is at that stage from the industry where, over half of it is going to be hit or miss. And I think there are brands that are shying away, but there are brands that are also out there pushing the envelope and seeing what works. I think the challenge for everyone is just figuring out like what actually clicks. What's really interesting for me to kind of observe and be a part of is actually looking at the women's sports and how women's sports fans are engaging with brands, because it's very different than kind of how brands are marketing and who's marketing to the men's sports, right? Like you go to the men's sports, there's usually like a beer company or, aftershave. On the women's side, I think I saw the stats, and I could be wrong on the stats, but there's something like only like 6 of the Fortune 500 companies in the US have a strategy on women's sports today. But women are the ones spending the money. Women have shown to have much more brand loyalty, higher conversion rates. And so I think the lowest hanging fruit for brands is actually, for the right brands, is to actually come through the women's sports side. Yeah, in terms of the challenge, I think it's just trying to understand, like, once you come in, what is that stickiness and conversion, right? Like what speaks authentically to that brand. McLaren did something really interesting with I think she's Filipino. I think it's McLaren Academy. There's a Filipino girl that's representing the brand. And I saw her speak right before F1 Singapore. And I was thinking to myself, like, these women athletes, she's 17 years old. She makes me want to be a McLaren fan because it was
Yeah.
so vulnerable and authentic in the way she presented it. I was like, 17-year-old boys will never be able to convert me as a McLaren fan. And so I think for brands, it's getting a little bit outside that comfort zone. And yeah, women's sports is early, but like the numbers are there, right? The trends are coming.
Yeah, I think another, and I believe from a prior conversation that we had, so please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misremembering, but also specifically with the LPGA, I think what was really fascinating was in the top 20 women golfers in the world, about 50% or just over 50% of them are actually from the ASEAN region, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think I looked it up yesterday to check
Okay.
like this year's ranking. So
Okay.
13 out of 20 is from
Wow.
APAC.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I think there's so much opportunity in women's sports in the region in general. Because if you look at all the national teams, right? Like Thailand football does really well, volleyball does really well, taekwondo does really well. It's all women. Not to say that we shouldn't fund the men's sports, but I feel like I ranted at you about this the last time we talked. But like, I really think Asia is just physics because I can go up against, somebody in America and like my size difference as a woman is going to be a lot less than, my brother who goes up against, a swimmer in the US, right? And so when we're really talking about pushing kind of the high elite level, like I really think that the women can do really well with the right resources and coaching. And brands can really piggyback on it because like we're so good at being influencers and ambassadors. So yeah, I don't know. I'm walking around with a hat that says like everybody watches women's sports. So help me beat that drum.
Yeah.
And how has your investment like thesis and the kinds of portfolio companies that you look at, changed over time? Maybe you could talk about some of the investments you did in the early days, and then the kind of what it's looking like now, and what you're focusing on.
Yep. Yeah. So to date, we've done six investment. We're actually closing our seventh one for this year, like now, imminently. Essentially, we've stuck to our kind of our thesis of this sports 3.0, right? And it's really looking at emerging sports league, the technology that enables it, mostly around the fan engagement space and the e-commerce space. And then we've expanded to essentially start covering brands. I think when we started, we just said emerging sports league and the technology around it, but we're starting to see that the leagues and the talent, the athletes around it are launching brands and actually using the technology as a way to get to customers. So I think we've kind of added that tail end to make it a much more complete portfolio ecosystem. And this deal that we're closing right now is in the Creators Golf League, and I think it exemplifies pretty much that is it's using YouTube as a way to engage with fans, and then through that they sell merchandise, and so they build a brand right off of the back of kind of YouTube content and some influencer talent.
Okay, and maybe just within the seven investments that you've made so far, what have been kind of the standouts? What ones have really kind of exceeded your expectations and that you'd like to highlight here?
Yeah, think golf. I mean, we keep circling back to golf just because the
Mm,
potential here is massive, right? We, I think we were the only Asian investors into Tomorrow Sports seed round and Series A round. And what Tomorrow Sports is, it's founded by Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, and a guy called Mike McCarley, who used to run the Golf Channel. It's stadium golf, and it's a new take on golf, right? It's 2 hours prime time on ESPN, I believe, every Monday. The inaugural season will be January, so we'll see. We won't know how it does until it actually goes out. But we're very excited about it because it comes at a time where betting is now legalized in the US. And so if you really imagine what it looks like is you walk in, it's a stadium, and you tee off into a simulator, a size of an IMAX theater. And then once the ball lands on the green, it's built on this turntable. And so it kind of goes sideways and undulates. So you can configure different holes in it. All the players are team based, and so there are storylines that you can build around them. They're all the top PGA players. Tiger Woods is also playing. And essentially, they'll be mic'd up, so you hear what's going on, right? And then you have all these data that then you can start to visualize it, but also feed into sports books. So there's multiple revenue stream that you can actually tap into one league. So we're very excited about that one. Where I would play it further in a kind of our hopes and dreams, let's just say. So we're not the ones driving the company, but I think it's gonna kind of pan out that way. Is season one was men's in conjunction with the PGA. Season two will hopefully expand into women's, and then they work down the academy system, right? Then you go into NCAA's, you go into youth. And to have that as a pinnacle, you then opened up all these potential league down below where people work to get to TGL. But what's exciting about that, linking it back to Asia, is like we have so many simulator. I think Korea is doing like 15% year over year growth in terms of simulator growth. And Thailand has a bunch of simulators popping up. It just makes golf competition a lot more accessible for people, right? Like Singapore this next year is closing down 3 public golf courses because they're going to make room for housing. And so in these congested Asia cities, a simulator makes sense. And so
right.
why can't we actually create competition virtually for youth so that a Thai girl can actually compete with somebody in the US rather than, a lost opportunity because they can't afford to fly? So I just get very excited about kind of like where that opens up in terms of development down the pipeline. But also like Asians hate sun, right? So like indoor, it seems to make sense.
Yeah, I mean there has. I mean it's interesting. I think with golf, it is one of those sports that like has needed to be like dragged into the 21st century, right? Like,
Yeah.
and even like the whole like playing 18 holes. I don't really know exactly who came up with that, but I think the most optimum for people is like maybe doing like 12 holes, and especially when it's really hot outside and humid, it's quite hard to make work. But the other one was Top Golf, and actually, in Cambodia, we've seen, I mean, definitely becoming more popular golf in general, but we don't really yet have these kinds of more accessible experiences. So, for example, we don't have Top Golf here yet. We do have some driving range and a few like 9-hole courses, but the rest is highly inaccessible. It's these 18-hole courses that are $200 for a round or $200 for a round, which is which makes it hard for a lot of people to want to engage. But then, as you say about simulators and screens, that's the same thing, right? Simulator and screen golf would be in the same category, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think if you look at kind of from the start of somebody going to like, a putt or like
Mm,
a putt shack or a Top Golf, or just being golf curious,
mm,
that range starting there all the way to when you actually like work up the courage to go to a country club there is a massive opportunity in that space, right? Whether it's like lifestyle, clothing, games, equipment, bars and socialization. Like there's so many things that just hasn't really been touched. And I actually don't think the future of golf is to get someone to a country club. I think there's a lot of people who are
Right.
like perfectly happy doing anywhere in between, right? And I think that's the opportunity. Yeah.
What do we? I mean, you couldn't talk about golf without talking about live golf. What do you think of that whole
I
thing
don't
that's
think it's going to
happened over?
happen. I
Okay.
don't think the merge is happening. I think they're
Yeah.
going to dance for a while, but I don't see it happening. I could be wrong. I don't have any kind of, insights into the current discussion behind closed doors, but if I would have to bet, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think no, I think that's definitely been like a big, headline for the sport, like, trying to innovate it and, paying obviously a lot of these professional golfers huge sums of money to come over. Um, but yeah, it's a really, I mean, it's really interesting to see what other sports would you say you've focused on aside from golf? Yeah.
Yeah. Basketball.
Mm.
We really like basketball. We made an investment into a company called Unrivaled, and it's
Yeah.
3v3 basketball format. So street basketball. We, throughout this conversation, you can probably tell I'm bullish on women's sports. But I think if we're looking at linking that type of format to Asia, 75% of Filipinos watch basketball one way or another, right? Like it's crazy. China has over 625 million basketball fans. Like 26% of the people who took the survey essentially report that they're watching it at least once a week. Basketball is so close to Japanese street culture and streetwear, where you have so much fusion into the fashion and kind of, attention, current attention. So we were just very excited about that area where you start to take basketball and you bring it into kind of the street culture and the more kind of youth side of things. Unrival is really interesting where they're trying to push the envelope on they are the highest paying league right now for women's basketball for the amount of time that they're paying, right? Like per contracts. I don't know if you know kind of the salary range of the WNBA, but like I think the MVP, like for sporting payment, she gets something around like $200,000. Like I'm pretty sure the starting five of any NBA team gets paid way more than that, right? WNBA numbers are insane this year. Like during the playoffs, Caitlin Clark effect, games are getting sold out. It's 50 million kind of unique viewership during the playoffs. So the numbers are there, just the kind of the compensation hasn't really converted. But we really like that these guys are kind of pushing the envelope that way. We also like kind of the tailwind of 3v3 basketball being in the Olympics, this past Olympics, and leading up to LA 2028. There's going to be a lot more push in that format. And so there's just kind of a lot of things that we really like about Unrival and what they're trying to do.
Okay, and yeah, maybe just looking out into the future, what's your vision for present ventures? Like, if we were to have another podcast, let's say in two or so years' time, what would you like to have achieved at that point?
Yeah, I mean, the thing for us is it's continuing to select these portfolio companies that we're just like entirely in love with. Very excited to help them build out. Like as I mentioned, we're looking at kind of 6 deals a year. And so I think in a year, just hitting that, but also kind of deepening our roots, continue to expand our network in Asia with operators. Like I should mention that, so Kit and I are partners of it, but the way that we build our firm, we have quite a broad base list of advisors who are very incentively aligned with us and our portfolio company, the way we designed it. And so we want to keep building out that network because we're kind of like matchmaking when one of our portfolio needs help, and we just send them over to the people who actually know best. And so growing that network for us, I think, becomes part of kind of our big growth plan and how we add value back to our company.
Yeah, and sorry, just on that, you said about focusing on operators in Asia. Like, of the 6, 7 deals you've done so far, how many of the teams are like, where are most of the teams based, or what's the kind of what do they look like in terms of like where they're from and such?
Yeah, I would say there's advisors, and then we have two fantastic venture partners. One of the venture partner, you guys actually should meet because you're also in the gaming space. He built out, he was the CTO of IO Interactive. He built out the Hitman series. And so when we look at anything around kind of the technology stack and like, is this entertaining from an engineering build out perspective? Like, he's our guy. Our other venture partner name is Ian Gaffney. He's based out of the US. He runs a very exclusive, but like amazing, probably the best sports conference I've ever been to. I haven't been to that many, but like top of my list. Invite only, no social media, no sales. And so the conversation there becomes very authentic. And he's the guy that knows essentially everyone and anyone, I think, in the US sports market. So he helps a lot with kind of looking at, is this like, how do we take this to the next level and who's the right people, whether during due diligence or once we make the investment to make introductions for our portfolio companies. And then on the other level, we have advisors, and a lot of them are actually kind of ex IMG executives and CEOs, chairman, that type of level where they're coming natively from the sports industry, because Kit and I are both kind of outsiders, bring a different perspective, right? When we use our network of advisors to eventually anchor us back into kind of the old school sport business.
I feel like the composition of that team from front to back, or if your team front to back, is very solid and definitely cohesive. Being able to anchor more to the traditional sports, it's always like, hey, we're still doing this here thing while you guys are thinking way farther ahead. So
Yeah.
that's always a fun discussion, I'm sure, that you get to have with your advisors on new ideas and emerging technologies within sports.
Yeah, it's they're great. And they're genuinely just excited on where sports needs to go, right? And so I think when we bring in kind of companies, these guys, I mean, sports people in general, ever since I've been in it in a short amount of time, I've never been in an industry that is like as pay it forward as sports. It's always just people are connecting each other all the time. So I love it.
Yeah, that no, that's really
One wait,
exciting.
one quick follow
Yeah.
up there. I guess you also get a lot of really cool invites as well, right? You get to go to a lot of the events.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like my business meetings are like going to like sports games. It's awesome. My parents don't think that I do real work.
What's been one event that you've gone to that has really kind of blown you out of the water with how like just the atmosphere, energy, maybe like the pre and post activities?
Yeah, I went to my first NWSL game a couple months ago, and it was Angel City and Portland. And it was really interesting for me to see, the makeup of the fans, because it's very family oriented. There's a lot of kids, it's like a really great environment and vibe. Yeah, I don't, it was just kind of like something in the air where it didn't feel like going down the street to like, a Thai football game where I'm like, I might get stabbed.
Yeah.
But it's just a really great vibe. I just like sports games in general, so I don't know if I can pick a favorite one, but I think that's the most recent one. So that's the one that I kind of get warm and fuzzy.
Full disclosure, actually, I am a Buriram fan. So
Oh, nice.
I've been to several of their games actually a while
Have you
ago.
been
This
to the
was
one with Port FC where apparently people stab each other?
no, I haven't, but that might be one I may want to avoid from the side
Yeah.
of things. So duly noted if I have anybody ever that wants to take me there, because we might have a problem with each other if that's the case that I would not be aware of.
Yeah.
uh,
I would add the other one that's worth going to is we went with our portfolio company to League of Legends. I know we didn't touch on
oh,
gaming at all,
cool.
but there is a
Yeah.
lot of this gaming component to the technology type of vertical that we look at. So it was in Seoul, and I was just like all smile for hours because like it was just such a massive production. They've done such a good job fusing kind of the gaming culture with the music culture, right? And like
Mhm.
I didn't think about it, but you rarely watch sports or play games without music anymore. So it was just a very interesting kind of amalgamation of like the two sector.
Yeah, I'm thinking like K-pop plus League of Legends probably seems like
Yes.
a fun combination to have together and integrate
Yeah.
energy if I'm visualizing things in that way. Funny enough, just a complete sidebar, but the a couple weeks ago I actually was watching the San Diego Wave FC, so the NWSL league match with Alex Morgan. I think it was her last match that she played.
Yeah.
I was really bummed that she didn't score the penalty kick, but it was still I felt like it was closing the book on history with her career as a U.S. Women's soccer athlete for the country.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
She's
that was great.
fantastic.
Yeah,
She's
uh,
amazing.
awesome. Yeah, she's
Yeah.
awesome.
I
Um,
mean, it's going to be very interesting to see a lot of these athletes then go on and have a second career as an entrepreneur and investor, right? So it'll be really interesting to see how she uses that platform to keep pushing women's sports.
and kind of just maybe taking a step back and thinking about the future of younger entrepreneurs that are within the space of whether it's sports, tech industries, or the combination of the two. What would there be any advice that you would want to share with them for young entrepreneurs that are looking to make an impact in tech industries or sports in general?
Yeah, I mean, I have friends that have gone through, the traditional investment banker route or something where it's very fixed in terms of where you progress with your career. And every now and then I'm like, like, should I have been doing that? Like, is this, I feel like as we were talking through this, like my story is just like, this is interesting. I'm going to jump in and do it. And so far, luckily, it's working out quite all right. But I was talking to one of my mentor about this, and she had said, you know, you can't put yourself, you're someone who people can't put in a box, right? They don't know how to like list you out. And rather than treating that as something that is a negative side, it's actually a superpower. So really lean into that. And so I think that's probably my parting words is like, if you don't fit in a box, like great, that's your superpower. Like lean into it. You want to try something, like jump in. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? So yeah, not being in a box.
Yeah, no, it's like however that's really great advice, and also however you want to interpret it too. Something Max and I always talk about is it's not necessarily the popular thing to be contrarian in a lot of aspects, but for us, especially covering what are sometimes considered overlooked markets in Southeast Asia, say, from an investment perspective, say like Cambodia, for example, the amount of interesting businesses and content that's being created and just this entire ecosystem is so fascinating that you just kind of want to do what you can to like continue heading in that direction. And whether that's like through investments, whether it's through sharing on a podcast channel or, whatever it is to bring visibility, it's, in any case, the long story short is that him and I both like very much resonate with that,
Yeah.
specifically in what we're doing with Rising Giants and Satori Giants as well.
Yeah. And I think it's platform like yours that surface people who aren't in a box, right? And that there's more than kind of a handful of people out there that are doing it too. So you don't feel like, oh my God, am I really that weird? Like what's going on? Yeah.
Well, that's the fun thing though, right? That's what makes things unique and interesting. So
Yeah.
it's always a fun conversation to have with anybody that's curious about it. So yeah, to on that note, Vansa, we really want to thank you for spending the time with us on Rising Giants today. It was absolute pleasure and was learned a lot about the sports 3.0 and what there is to come in these emerging technologies that are coming, especially in Southeast Asia. So thank you again for the time, and we look forward to hearing about the next round of successful investments from Present Ventures.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much.